Good day, dear Wastelanders. Sanctuary Stonemason here, and first of all, huge thank you for the 500 subscribers, and to celebrate, here's my first ever how to build guide. We're going to build a Minuteman outpost at the northern wonder that is Outpost Zimonja. By the way, that's how I'm pronouncing it. If I'm wrong, so be it. This is going to be 4 episodes that covers my thought processes, strategies, and build techniques, so please drop any questions or criticisms in the comments section, because I'd really love to hear your feedback, good or bad. So for the sake of clarity and detail, I build on a PS5 and I use one mod and one mod alone, which is the Scrap That Settlement mod. It just helps me get rid of the clutter that Bethesda thinks that long-term settlers would choose to ignore, such as detritus and dead bodies. So whenever you see green, it would normally be deletable. Whenever you see yellow highlights, that's the mod doing its job. Other than that, everything you see with my builds is achievable via the base game, DLC, and Creation Club content. So if you're new around here, please like and subscribe, and everyone put their notifications on to join me on the journey to the new Outpost Zimonja. So let's get started. First job's to clear out the existing settlement items that I don't want to use. Now this, on what I choose to delete, is determined very much by the location and then what kind of settlement I'm going to try and achieve within it. With Zimonja, I'm going to try and incorporate the original structure into a bigger, grander structure, so I'm going to be very careful about what I remove so that there's a nice seamless blend between the two. And it's worth bearing in mind that with the scrap mod, if you delete a yellow thing, you're never seeing it again, and a lot of the yellow things tend to add a lot of character, so be careful with what you delete. For example, what you can see here, I'm being very careful to try and only delete the broken fencing because I think the undamaged fencing will add a great aesthetic to the final build. Okay, so we have our blank canvas. Now, I always try to have an overarching plan about what I'm trying to achieve, and that I know this is going to be a Minuteman outpost, and therefore it's going to be well fortified, it's going to be walled, and it's going to have a busy pseudo-town square kind of vibe going on. But irregardless of the overall plan, I'd always recommend starting from the middle and building out, due to the nature of the geographical build limitation and how much more difficult it gets as you get towards the outskirt. So, what you can see me fiddling on with now is trying to develop the footprint of Zimonja. Now, due to the oversensitive and unpredictable nature of Bethesda's build system, this can be an absolute dick. But there are a couple of tips and tricks to help get around it that will become second nature and an integral part of your building strategy. 2 of which you're going to see here as I fuddle and try and get this bloody thing to stick in. The primary of which is that the snap will allow you to ignore the proximity of other items far more than trying to place them originally is, which is what you can see me struggling with here. By trying to place an additional section of flooring at the right distance away from where you would like your flooring, the snap system will ignore the things giving you problem and snap into place, which you should eventually see here. But additional to that, the selection of what kind of flooring will help. Some floor is particularly kind. As you can see, the lovely little Slocum's Joe donut shop floor is particularly nice and will slide in lovely. Once you can see it working in principle, it's just a case of sliding it around until you can find the neatest fit for you to develop your floor space. Now, what I'm doing here is thinking off the bat is that immediately I can see that the blend between the 2 different floorings is going to lend to a nice little bar area. So this is a case of allowing the environment to instruct the design rather than being too precious about what it is you're trying to achieve. Now, with the floor space settled, I can start thinking about what it is I want to put here. Now, overall, I know I want to fit in well with the existing Zimonja wasteland feel, but develop it with my own personal Minuteman vibes. So at this point, I'm thinking, what can I get to sit in on the walls? Again, the environment's very much going to push me as to what can be achieved here, but finding out that I can get junk walls to sit into the rocks is a fantastic moment for me, because it made it look as if I was really clever, where in fact, like most of the best moments in my builds, it was a complete accident. Okay, so now we're going to move forward with trying to build something a little bit bigger and a little bit more impressive in the center of the settlement. I've decided that I'm not going to need those fencing parts because there will need to be access in and out of what it is I'm going to build. But here we go again, same strategy. This is going to be a little simpler theoretically. It's very much just a case of lining up close to where you are. You can see that little gap, there's no good there. If you delete that and then slightly nudge this little piece forward, then you will start to be able to get a much cleaner join and something that will become almost seamless to the existing floor plan. Okay, so that's pretty much perfect. Now I'm just going to try and pad out and see how big I can make this central building. I think this is pretty much going to hold the general store and some accommodation, but this should be the hub of the place. This is going to be what sort of dominates the center, the pseudo town center, as I described it earlier. So I'm going to get some walls up. Now what you'll notice is that I'm going to use the various different walls. What they are is there's obviously the wall with the window, the wall without the window, and the door frame. And they all come in 2 or 3 different states of dilapidation. Now what I'll do is rotate and move around and use different ones at each aspect so that when you're inside and outside of the building, there's no repetition and you get a much more real feel for the building. If you use the same wall piece over and over again, there are recognizable patterns and it becomes a little unnatural and looks a bit shit. And that can go for everything, whether it is walls or fences or some of the more interesting floor pieces. Now I'm starting to get a feel for the size of the building, and I do want to get a few different aspects and merchants within this settlement, even though it's not the biggest. I know for a fact that as it's an outpost, I'm going to want a gun shop. I'm probably going to want a doctor's or a clinic of some description as well. I mean, we've already got a bar and a space for a general store, but on top of that, I do like to keep accommodation separate. I don't like these big sort of rooms that have 8 beds in, so I'm being very mindful that there's going to be space for everything that I want in. So as much as this needs to be dominating, I don't want it to take over the whole space. Now, as a quick note, I have realized that it is dark, and this is the first video I've made like this, and I will be mindful in future to make sure that it is daytime. This I've left in because you need to see that there's losses as well as wins. This was a pain in the arse. Now, trying to get a fence to sit on this took far more time than it needs to be, and even by the end of it, it wasn't right. So it is what it is, but here we go. The plan was to try and build a fence that became a seamless part of what was the existing fencing structure, because unfortunately, without mods, I do not have the ability to build the wire fencing, which is a frustration whilst I've got onto this subject as to why the build assets weren't developed more. I don't know, they seem to get obsessed with adding in Creation Club huge numbers of modern apartments and different build things that weren't actually in the game to start with, instead of just using the assets that you see all around the world and giving you build packs that could allow you to be more fundamental to the world. I don't know, most of the builders that I see online very much want to be wastelandy. They want to fit within the world. I don't see many people out there building modern apartments or modern-ish with pristine furniture. So it's bizarre to me. Anyway, what you're seeing me do now was a huge waste of time, which is why I chose to talk over it. You saw me just build a structure, because what sometimes happens when you put a stairwell in is that it isn't quite flush with the world. So what I like to do is just sink in a little bit of floor into just underneath with the pillar glitch. That was the first time you saw the pillar glitch, but I'll go into that a bit more later, so that there's a bit of flooring that sort of beds into the ground so that it's a nice even match. So as you'll see, still dark. Still pissing about with this fence, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to figure out that it's dark soon. Well, maybe not. So the thinking here is to continue with the idea that this is going to end up feeling like the one structure or one place. So I'm just going to now sort of try and build in a corridor aspect that leads us from the existing or old Zimonja structure to the new Zimonja structure. And hopefully at some point I'm going to figure out it's dark. Can't be long now. So what you're seeing at the moment is a different aspect of building, not using the snap and just using the free movement to try and slide walls into position. A lot of the more complicated builds that I've done are riddled with that. If you have a look at my battle arena at Starlight Drive, for instance, which involved a lot more of moving things off snap and using the pillar glitch just to try and find a more natural integration so everything wasn't boxy in a more interesting shape. I think if you're trying to get your settlement building to the point where it looks like it's something that could exist in game as opposed to a normal build, you very much need to free yourself from the snap, because it's there that you end up with the more creative options, you end up with the more interesting look and the lack of obvious repetition which is present when you just do the standard building. And it's with that same mentality of trying to keep things interesting that I can discuss what I'm trying to do now. What I'm going to try and do here is add different levels to different parts of the building, in that 2/3 of the building are going to have 2 or 3 stories, and that first section that's going to be nearest to the gatehouse will only have a single story. And again, this is because I'm always trying to keep things interesting. I like to keep things natural, as I keep banging on about. And because I'm a massive build nerd, either when I'm walking around the wasteland or the real world, I'm always paying attention to the relationship between buildings. And the one thing that I've noticed is that there's always a contrast in direction and shape of roofs, and that the buildings are never at the same story level. There's never consistency. Consistency isn't really natural. There's always variety, and that's always something I'm trying to emulate with my own builds. But also with this building, there's a thought process that what this is a part of an existing structure from before the war, and then what's going to happen on above is something that the Minutemen have added at a later date, which is why you'll see me using different kinds of materials for the different floors. Now, it's worth mentioning that what you just saw with me removing the roof pieces and putting them back was that the wall pieces from the wood pack don't play nice with the wall pieces from the barn pack. So basically, if you just remove the roof, put up your wall pieces and then put the roof back, then it'll all sit together nicely. So sometimes when things don't fit, it's a case of just playing around with the order at which they go in till they're happy, which can take time, but it will happen. Now, I've obviously decided that this needs an extra floor. So again, just keep them with the mentality that this has been done with the Minutemen building on top of an existing structure. I've switched out to the warehouse, so it's a corrugated steel. It's like, I always love going to corrugated steel because I know that in an event of an apocalypse, the ability to remove corrugated steel from a building, transport it, and then rebuild with it will be a huge aspect of what will be done to rebuild the Commonwealth. But then on top of that, I'm going to go back to the original plan of building a 3rd floor now with that sort of wasteland wood vibe, which is far more along the lines of finding bric-a-brac and scrap and just piecing it together as best as possible to create a structure. See, in my opinion, it's the combination of all of the build methods and materials that will give you the more convincing big structures. Obviously, if you're building something small, you can go stick with a single theme, but if you're going for multi-story, try and mix it up and give yourself some interest and some excitement. Now, I'll just leave you to watch me fiddle on for a while. So, what you'll notice is that I'm using the wall pieces from the wood pack that, whilst they generate additional floor space, create an overhang outside. What you'll also notice is that I'm now starting to piss around with these stupid fence pieces again, because apparently that's how I like to spend my time. In a moment, though, what you'll notice is that I'll go outside, and it's whilst I've generated this additional floor space, which is good, and some of the overhang is pleasant, it does look a little bit top-heavy. For those of you who have seen my water farm build, when they stand tall and proud, it's not so bad, but this low down, it looks a little bit mushroomy. So what I'm going to do is remove the sides of the overhang, and then that'll give me the ability to build some form of support structure that makes it look more natural. So what you'll see me do here, after a little bit of fiddling around, is a nice little trick to be able to latch stuff on without having to remove parts. Now, if you look at this form of flooring that comes from the warehouse set and can also be found in the barn set, and what you'll see is that I can snap it quite comfortably at any section of any wall, which means that I can then in turn use that to be able to snap in these support pillars. And what's going to be really frustrating is that you're going to see me do all of this and then not actually put the support pillars in for some reason, but I promise you at some point I do. So the next thing I'm going to do is put a porch over this area, and I'm going to use this wall from the warehouse set just as the frame to put in some roofing that will become the porch cover. I need to use the wall because the roof won't snap unless there's something to snap to, but once it's in, I can delete the wall and start putting in some support beams to make it look more like a porch. Now what you're about to see is me titting around with said support beams, not noticing that the base one isn't in correctly, not least because it's dark, but I've left it in so you can learn from my stupidity. So whilst I'm correcting the stupidity, just a little bit of a note here. You'll notice that I'm adding in these small walls from the wood section. Now these have to be in first. I'm going to try and get the support beams in underneath them, but if these sections detect anything even close to them, they won't go in. So I'm just making sure that they're there. Now what you should see now, eventually, come on you idiot, I'm going to notice that the beams aren't in right and just correct it fairly simply. There we go. And then I'll notice these won't snap. That's fine, I'll add them in manually, that's not a problem. Eventually they'll look perfect. And a similar one on the other side, which I don't think snaps either. No, that's fine. These do snap, and there we have it. Support and a porch. Beautiful. Now, I think it'll just be a case of repeating the process on the other side, but I'm going to use a different material for the beams. Again, all variation creates interest. Look at that. Lovely. Same on the other side. Get rid of these floors. And now eventually he's figured out it's dark. There we go. Daylight. Beautiful. Happy days. So what I'm going to do now is just add some internal support just to make it look like the building wouldn't fall down. Just little things I think help just to make it feel real. And once we're done with that, we'll get some walls and a roof on upstairs and we've got ourselves a building. Now obviously I'm continuing the junk feel, but what I'm going to do is use these windows right at the end, annoyingly right at the end. These just, it's basically junk windows. Just gives some air, being able to see outside I think is really nice. Much as in real life, having a room without windows ain't much fun. But yeah, getting the last little pieces in, and then we'll go to the roof. Now there's only a couple of these that I like using because realistically the majority of them have just got massive holes in, so unless you're doing raider field builds, that they always seem a little bit ill-advised. And there we have it. We have our first full building. There we go. I think it's sitting in really nicely with the existing structure. Pretty much achieved what I was going for. Sort of nicely sits with everything, makes it feel like it was all meant to be there. So on we go. Now, as far as my plan is, I know the only other self-supporting structure that I'm going to have that doesn't sort of form part of the wall that's going to be around the settlement is going to be a greenhouse just for growing our food. Minutemen gotta eat. This is simple enough. It's like I've built these so many times now. Now what I'm doing now is just with your action button, which is the X on PlayStation. You guys all know what it is for your relative formats. You just press and hold, which will select all bits, and then you can raise and lower and move around until your heart's content. Now I'm just adding in the glass walls. You'll notice that I'm switching between the broken and the non-broken just to switch it up. Again, don't use too many of the broken ones because they are very clearly patterned and they become repetitive themselves. But one on each side I think is enough. Same goes for the roof. Again, don't overuse. And there we have it. A bit of stairwell in, bit of fencing. Bosh. So the way we can plant inside this greenhouse is we'll use the garden plot planters from the Wasteland Workshop DLC. First off, I'm going to put these in completely skew with and then I'll correct them. You can get 4 nut fruit, 6 potatoes, 6 carrots, 6 corn, and then you can plant anything else, but they're the ones I tend to use the best returns. So it's somewhere between 4 and 3 food per planter. Even then I'm mixing up to make sure that it looks as real as possible. And I've only got 4 carrots. There we have it. So, next on the agenda is I'm going to attach to the existing structure a power room or substation. And I definitely don't want an arcade carpeted floor. There we go. Now again, this is just about getting as close as possible, but not so close that I can't get the back of the wall in. Or so I thought. I'm pretty sure I messed this up, but I just choose to go with it anyway. So I'm going to be using the warehouse walls. As always, you'll see me switch between different versions just to get some interest. Put a door in. Now the reason I'm adding these extra sections at the top is I'm going to be using a fusion reactor and the connection point at the top is just slightly taller than the single wall. Which can come in handy actually because it means you can run the power out of the roof because it sticks through. But for this I need it to come out sideways, so I've added it in. There we go. And then I'll run some power points. So what I'm going to do now is just the wire glitch. So you'll see me have the wall the wrong way around or the facing way around, and I'll just add in a switch there, connection point there, run it, flip the wall around, and then as we'll go around and see, you'll see the wiring is now running through the wall. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, but I will say that when I come to use it much later in the build, I haven't noticed that I can't actually access it. So that's a bit of a mistake, but it won't matter. I'll just run everything from that one PowerPoint. Add a door. And then add some nice roofing. I do like these roofs. Nice point of interest. The flat roofs look ridiculous. You can't see them from any angle, so it just looks like there isn't a roof. And this is my favorite power room door, and there we have it. A finished power room. So now we've got power, we've got food, so that's a good start. So now I'm just going to fiddle around with this section a bit. Now I know I can slot a wall in here. It's not my first time building at Zimonja, and I also know that I can get some fencing in around here just to make it a little less precarious. A little more Minuteman, a little less Raider. You'll see the standard fencing technique that if you watch my videos you're going to see a lot, which is to rotate through those, and then any awkward bit I'll go to the concrete fence that snaps. And then finally, just to put the finishing touches on this original part of the build, we're going to smarten up the base of this here. It looks too rickety, not supportable, and like it's going to fall down, so we're going to do some work to smarten it up. So, pillar glitching, the famous pillar glitch. I use the concrete pillar. It's nice and simple. Few little tips. Always make sure that it's slightly sunk into the ground. If you fiddle around with any of the pillars, you'll notice that there's a little click as it sits on top of the ground as opposed to being sunk in the ground. Now, always make sure that when you do the selection, which again is press and hold in your action button, that it is slightly sunk. And then if you just check it straight away and move it up and down, you'll know that it's working. And once it's working, you can move it in. And now that's not to say there isn't some areas in every settlement where it'll be awkward and it won't fit. That's just a sad fact of life. And then straight on to the next glitch. This is the rug glitch. This is my rug of choice. I always use 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 or 5 just to slide it in, because it's where the first rug sits, which will allow you to place things. So sometimes you just need that extra distance just to make sure that you can get the wall section moved in. Now, I think I've spent at least 200 hours rug glitching junk fences in to build, so I'm pretty much a pro at this now. There's different ways of doing it, which you'll see. I'll not spoil it now because my word will be talking about it at length later when we're doing the actual walls. But they're just a great way of adding texture and interest and making things look as if they've been added in the wasteland era as opposed to a relic of the past. Now, next, there's my foibles, is that there's one of the support props is floating in midair, which always pisses me off, so I am just going to scroll through the almost infinite number of miscellaneous items to find these fellas, and they always sink in nicely and cover all sins. And there we have it, the first section of the build. We have our greenhouse, we have our extended area where we've added a power station, and we've supported the existing structure. And then, of course, we have our brand new central structure, which is going to play host to a general store and some accommodation. And there we go. So please like and subscribe and stick the notifications on, because episode 2 will be coming out soon, which will develop the build. We'll be adding the gatehouse, the walls, several other structures, all exciting stuff. See you soon.